And isn't it also interesting as an artist to be able to, in your classes, talk about what's happening in society,
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
and to because then young people can actually get, or older people, depending on the age of who you're teaching. If you're teaching adults, you can actually get um, a discussion going when, in actual fact, perhaps people don't discuss things anymore because they just talk to each other on mobile phones,
Hmm.
they watch TV or they watch their computer screen. Do they talk anymore?
Hmm.
And teaching, training, you don't talk, you just listen and do.
Hmm.
So,
It's interesting. It's what we were saying before, where teaching is actually learning. Learning is teaching. It's a
yes,
circular thing, and I very much felt this, and this is what I wrote about during my course, is how whenever I'm teaching, I feel I'm learning. I mean, I used to teach English to Italians in Italy in 1979, and I learnt a lot of Italian by teaching them English. And that, in a sense, was a very sort of simplistic, but a good example of the whole situation. I think if you're diligent about the way you teach, you'll be open, and if you're open, you're going to be learning. I think it's an incredible energy stoking cycle to be
it's
involved in.
it's open-ended, isn't it? It's not close-ended
Mm.
like training. I mean, at art school, you were trained to use certain techniques, how to do certain techniques, and so on. That's important. Of course, that's important. But once you know how to use those techniques, then it becomes, doesn't it? Doesn't it become a question of actually thinking with your training,
Yes, absolutely.
not
Although,
just doing, but thinking, doing, thinking as a result of doing.
oh,
No.
absolutely. But going back, I mean, my training in the 70s was in the fine arts faculty was very much not teaching you to use technique. This is what I'm saying. It perhaps might be now, but then it was very much of allowing you to explore, which was incredible, really, when I think about it. Allowing
How
you
did
to
they do that? That sounds really interesting. How did they
well,
do that?
obviously, in the case of metal welding, oxyacetylene welding, which I remember with great joy, obviously you have to be taught safety and you have to be taught the mechanical procedures. But once you were taught that, it's not as if you were taken through a process of this is what you do now and that's what you do then. I remember being left alone to invent a sculpture with rods and plates. And I think it's in the garden rusting away now. But it's very small models I remember making with rods and plates and oxyacetylene welding them together. Fascinating insight into materials and the way they behave. Um, hey, perhaps that's where the rust started.
Yes, I wanted to actually. I wanted to ask you about that. Can you go on to talk a bit about that and show us, the work?
Because I've got the date and I've got the place. Now, this is a recording of a place and a situation. As I said, as if I was holding up a plate to the world. And so, actually, long before the beach stuff started, I was actually recording my tea bags and dating them. It's just that the format I realised that occurred in 1993 was obviously carried through to the trace elements body of work proper. And this is 2001, where the actual title, so the whole thing is trace elements. So whenever it's shown again, it'll be trace elements as a project, trace elements as an installation. But what differs each piece of work is the date. For example, here we have the date that the iron was found, and the date the iron was printed. So on each one you have that system of cataloguing, the date it was found, the date it was printed, and this is physically typed with an old-fashioned typewriter, again very essential and primal, onto the actual paper. So that became very much part, almost like the cataloguing is part of the work itself. I'm always interested in the structure of the museum, and all the cataloguing and the classification that goes on, and in a sense that relates to the scientific nature of this work, that it should be classified and catalogued.
So you have these enclosed forms and these explosive forms.
Yes. Look at this wild one here. This is the large plate, almost uncontained.
What is that
That,
originally?
that is this. Originally.
Looks like lava.
Looks like?
Lava.
Yes. And it's basically this piece of metal,
Goodness.
which is with a solution of brine, paper soaked in a solution of brine, to further stimulate the rusting process, as the sea would have been doing anyway,
Ah,
in order to allow it to offer its pigment up. And here we're talking about pigments. If you think, I mean, the reason why this felt so strong for me is that I think everybody's experienced getting a rust stain on their clothing and realising how difficult it is to get the bloody thing off. It made me realise how permanent a pigment this could be, and that it gave it even more weight. The fact that one can print it onto paper, and in fact, it's a shame because that's on someone's old piece of work. But if you see you can see that it actually comes through in a lot of cases to the other side, which further emphasises the fact that this can become sculpture. This, no matter how thin the material is nevertheless three-dimensional. For me, that's no longer about surface image. It's no longer about image making. Although in fact it's a monoprint, in reality, for me, it's a solid. It's
So-
a
so you would exhibit these in under glass, so where people could see both sides.
I have exhibited these in Spain, in Orense, in a museum cabinet hung with clothes pegs, with the original piece of material below, so that they would have been hung,
So you can see both sides
that
of the picture.
displayed, and that above. And in that sense, it gives you the origin, and it gives you the idea that this is a physical object. That's the idea, really, here, that we're not talking about a print, we're talking about an impregnation.
Right.
Put it that way. We're talking about the very fabric.
And these.
These are very recent experiments. In about 6 months ago, I wanted to expand the repertoire, really. I wanted to expand the palette, if you like. And
Where does the colour come
well, the colour comes from copper. It's copper sulfate.
from? Which is incredibly beautiful blue,
It
isn't
is
it?
beautiful. It's my favourite colour, and somehow I'm drawn to copper. As I'm drawn to iron, but I'm also drawn to copper for some reason. And
It's continually changing, isn't
the
it?
fact that it gives up this beautiful hue, again, just as with the rust, the contrast really, and the fact that they're complementary colours. You have, I mean, you've got the orange rust, and you've got this green-blue copper.
And does this relate to your interest in alchemy?
It very much so, not in a technical sense, but in a sort of gut sense. I'm overwhelmed, I'm overjoyed. When something is, as I put it, cooking, in other words, I've got a plate of copper laid on top of this paper, which has been soaked in vinegar, and every day I come in and I check it, and it's grown or it's done something different. This is fascinating for me because I'm actually observing nature in action. I'm actually observing the elements doing their thing. And the beauty for me of this work is that balance between my input and the nature's input. So it's neither heavily one-sided or the other. It's a beautiful balance. In other words, we're working together. I like to feel I'm working with what happens naturally. The copper starts in a vapour, a bath of vapour, where I've created myself out of yoghurt pots. You see the bath of vinegar underneath, onto which sit pieces of copper. Now they need priming in this way because if you see inside, what happens is you get this incredible colour, and that comes from the mixture of oxygen and acetic vapour, which is from the vinegar. In the experiments I've done, you can't just sit raw copper that hasn't been oxidised onto the paper and expect things to happen. It has to, in a sense, be primed like this. But the copper really was a way of experimenting with, as I say, extending the palette and finding other ways of pushing the boundaries. Subsequently, I've realised that there's an electrical, a sort of psychological electrical connection here, because you've got iron and you've got copper, you've got almost got elements that are used in a battery.